I hope that the vast bulk of us here today realise that if we're going to make much of a difference to the world, it's going to be in occupying the middle ground. There's only been one group in Australia that I know of that's successfully occupied the middle ground, and that's Landcare. But they got away with it because they're not dealing with ideologies, they're dealing with practicalities of particular projects. They're very much project driven, and beyond that they haven't poked their heads up all that much, other than the odd little bit of motherhood and apple pie. In the things that I've done over the last year with the media, they are absolutely unable to cope with someone who says, I live in the middle ground, I live in what's achievable. I care about the environment, I care about people, I care about people having a good lifestyle and having enough money to be able to save the environment, and I see it as one thing. When I'm interviewed time and time and time again, the people interviewing me cannot cope with that thought. So I think we all have a big job to try to move the process from those two extremes, because it's simply unproductive if we can't do it. I think that the green groups are perceived as being the harmless little warriors that are fighting for the good of the planet. But the truth is something entirely different from that. Many of these green groups have enormous budgets, and they're incredibly powerful, often more powerful than particular governments, and they're not really responsible, even if they have members, they're not really responsible for the things they do in the sense that government is, or whatever. They're not really democratically controlled. I've read a lot that the current younger people, Generation Y and beneath, are the most media savvy generation ever. I believe, in fact, they are the least media-savvy generation ever. These younger people today are amazingly manipulated. You know, whether it's the latest iPod or whatever it is, 1,000 things, and sitting addicted to mobile phones and computers. Clearly, in so many ways, in the ideas that they have, in the way they live their lives, these people are terribly manipulated, and they're deluded by us and themselves to think that they're very media-savvy. They are not. What that means is, if the world is polarising everyone, so if at one side you've got the greenies who are valiant losers, like the heroic figures of history, and on the other side you've got the exploiters who run evil industry that will pollute and destroy the world, and if that's how the whole thing's presented, there is no hope. No hope to save the world. It's a disaster. So clearly what we've got to do is work towards building the middle ground. It's with enormous sadness that I tell you that we approached a number of Green people to be part of this conference, and basically, you know, all of those ones who were straight Green, I've listed their names and affiliations in my notes, said no. And I suspect that many of them genuinely feel there was no place for them in a room with a lot of people that are developing businesses and moving forward in all sorts of areas. I think they couldn't see that that's their place. I've always seen that it's my place. When I started to set up environmental weeds legislation for East Coast Australia, I saw myself, you go into the dirty areas and you get into bed with the people that are causing problems. Same as when I set up what was then the NRA in Canberra, the APVMA now, which is the body that controls all the agricultural and veterinary chemicals. I went to what would be perceived as the dirtiest area of Australia, chemicals. And we managed to make some very good changes without any fights. We didn't have people polarised. And when we set up that board of what was the NRA initially, no one was permitted to represent any group. They had to go along there for their expertise, not for the rivalries of groups and dogmas and so on. And those dogmas are our enemies, and I have a real problem. It is a challenge for all of us. We wish to work with industries to achieve better and better results for the environment and for people. We supported the farmers in Western New South Wales. I really feel for those poor buggers out there on the land. What they're offering to do is, as you all know, this so-called woody weeds issue, that the Aboriginal people fire managed the land for a long time, burnt it to grasslands, and all the animals evolved to suit there, and it's a rich biodiversity. Then when the burning stopped because the Aboriginal people were pushed off or whatever, they didn't get their early land management too right, and a lot of the trees and shrubs grew back, and it's a problem. They're now trying to look at how they deal with that so they can turn it back into grasslands. And the environmental solutions that they're offering are really very good and very generous, And it's the way, the hope and the future for the world, where you get that lovely compromise between earning a living and saving the environment. But then you've got Kyoto, and the government, the federal government went to the state government and said, hey boys, push them off the land. So that's essentially what they're doing, is pushing them off the land, because you get cheap Kyoto points if you don't chop down trees and if you don't turn the soil over. And those cheap points balance out our Kyoto statistics for carbon in terms of particularly the awful carbon put into the atmosphere by the coal power stations. So it's government who have a vested interest in those power stations, and they're just jiggering with the figures so that they look better for political reasons. In the process, you've got the farmers stuck there trying to do the right thing by their local environment. They're being pushed to the brink of where they'll have to walk off their lands, and no compensation. Now, this isn't the way we're going to save the planet. If this is the dynamic of striding forward into the new millennium, the planet's got no hope. Absolutely no hope. And I feel I've been out there with them to meeting after meeting in the Western New South Wales areas, and it's so tragic because most of them are dinosaur-like characters, heroic characters, and they're putting up the good fight, but they don't even know what the fight is, and government people have them completely outmanoeuvred, and that is just tragic. We've supported the Bell Bay pulp mill in Tasmania. Again, it's best practice pulp production, and without going into all of the details, basically, what more can you do in moving forward? What more can you do than support best practice? It's probably not perfect practice. In fact, it isn't. But all you can do is the best you can with constant levels of improvement, because remember, levels of improvement are always compound interest. You get much more than the individual gains once you've had a few generations of change. But, with them, within 5 years, 80% of the timber will be from their own plantation production. I've gone and looked at all that. I went and talked to their piddly little people, some little conservationist person that was doing something somewhere. I spoke to quite a few of them, and I pulled them aside from the bosses and said, what's it really like, Can you do what you want to do? Yeah. Are you really saving those species of plants and those animals? Is that practice good? Yeah, it's fantastic. I love coming to work each day. I've never felt so important in my life. Why don't we ever hear from people like that? They're working for groups like GUMS. But I did check it out right through from those little guys. We had barbies with them and a chat and everything else. These are very, very genuine greenies who feel proud to be involved in their jobs every day. None of that reaches the media. The mill will generate 90 megawatts of power into the state power grid, which is about what Launceston uses currently, so that's pretty fantastic. Water usage is around 1% of the Tamar River estuary. Effluent is primary and secondary treated, and then goes out 3 kilometres into Bass Strait. I mean, it's pretty good stuff. There's a lot of millions of dollars gone into all that. I mean, it just seems to me that the ideologues who are coming up and saying, our precious little trees and all that, it ain't going to save the world. There's a whole young generation coming up who have been utterly indoctrinated into the fact that all industry is evil and so on and so forth. The fact is, the battle for the green ideology is over. What we need to now do is go to the next stage, which is how do you save the world? We know the problems. It's how you save it. We obviously need support for best practice farming, mining, energy production, water provision, forestry, all of that. Best practice aquaculture, fish harvesting, support for lateral thinking production. I still think, and I don't know whether, Graham, you're going to talk about any of this, but I would love to, talking tomorrow, Graham Webb, some of the feral animals and semi-ferals, goats, kangaroos, rabbits, foxes, donkeys, pigs, water buffalo, camels, horses, God knows what we can do with wild harvests, but my idea, what is it? There's 13 bloody rabbits in that hat. 13 rabbits. They're good rabbits. And if you can make money out of them, they're even better rabbits. We need fresh thinking where there are creative solutions to offer a better way forward, support for industries and people who are being unfairly treated, and of course we need to look at this best practice idea. No best practice is perfect. It's critically important we maintain a realistic view of best practice, not an idealistic one. So, and in that, I believe the AEF is uniquely positioned to play a role, and that's what I'm hoping will emerge today and tomorrow, that we look at more of these chipping away solutions. They may not all be heroic and wonderful, but I'm hoping we can chip away.